This video is sponsored by Tabletop Ready Miniatures. Get your favorite minis at a discounted price by visiting tabletopreadyminiatures.com. Link in the description below. Hey Wargamers, today we're going to continue our 2019 update series of the Tau Codex by looking at this little guy, the Tau Ethereal. Now, this particular model was probably one of the earliest times that I can remember actually being happy with how I painted Tau flesh and shaded white, so I'm pretty excited about it. But overall, it doesn't get much use because the Ethereal is a pretty good HQ choice, especially with certain army builds. It is almost necessary for some builds, but in general, it gets outshone by other HQ units. So today we're going to talk about exactly when you want to be using an Ethereal, its strengths, its weaknesses, and how you might incorporate it into your Tau army. Alright, so let's start with the stat line. For about 45 points, you're getting a single character model. Movement 6 inches, weapon skill 3 up, ballistic skill 4 up, strength 3, toughness 3, 4 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 9, and a 5 up save. So right off the bat, you should note that the Ethereal is nothing special when it comes to its durability on the tabletop. It doesn't have very many wounds, it's only toughness 3, and has a 5 up save. So it's not going to really take a punch at all. What you're bringing the Ethereal for is his leadership, as well as his special rules. In particular, the failure is not an option special rule is universally valuable for the Ethereal. It basically allows any Tau Empire units within 6 inches to utilize the Ethereal's leadership instead of their own. So for most units, this is going to be an increase of at least 1 or 2 leadership points. In the case of drones, it's going to be 3 leadership points at a minimum. So really, you're boosting leadership quite a lot within that bubble. And so certain builds that rely on having a large number of infantry or a large number of drones especially are going to get a lot of value out of having an Ethereal because of that leadership buff alone. Ethereals also have access to a pretty flexible special rule in the form of Invocation of the Elements. This allows you to declare one of 4 elemental powers during your movement phase, and at that point, all infantry and battlesuit units within 6 inches of that Ethereal gain some benefit. In the case of Calm of Tides, you subtract 1 from any morale test. For Storm of Fire, you can reroll hit rolls of 1 in the shooting phase for units that have remained stationary in that movement phase. For Sense of Stone, you can basically get a 6 up Feel No Pain roll. And for Zephyrs Grace, you can re-roll advance rolls. So you can see how each of these abilities would be beneficial in some scenarios, but not necessarily in every scenario. In particular, Calm of Tides is going to be a really good option if you have large infantry blobs that need to pass morale. If they take a lot of casualties and you really need them to make it, this is your option. Additionally, this is a power that would be really awesome on drones if it affected drones. But drones aren't infantry or battlesuits, so unfortunately that's not the case. Storm of Fire is also pretty good, but it's like a less powerful, less specific marker light, but also with conditions. So, you have to meet the condition of not moving in the movement phase, but it applies to a bunch of different units potentially, regardless of their target, whereas marker lights are restricted to a particular target. So, you actually have some good synergy here with marker lights, either in cases where you run out of marker lights on desired targets, or if you want to actually start off a marker light chain with a less accurate marker light source. So let's say you have a couple unit of Pathfinders around your Ethereal. This is a really good way to start your marker light chain by allowing them to reroll 1s even though they don't have a marker light on target already. So this is actually fairly flexible, but partially redundant. If you do have sufficient marker light support, you really don't need this, and so it generally is not going to be called as often as some of the other powers. In contrast, I think Sense of Stone is almost the default option when using an Ethereal. It gives you a 6 up Feel No Pain, and that's going to be useful whenever anything gets hurt, basically. For battlesuits, it's probably a little less useful, maybe a little bit more useful for things like the smaller suits, like stealth suits, and less useful for things like Riptides and Broadsides, because those things should have adequate drone support. That makes this, pointless. But for infantry especially, having the ability to have a 6 up Feel No Pain on lots of bodies is useful. That will add up when you have 20, 30 Fire Warriors sitting around an Ethereal. So having Sense of Stone is basically the default option for a lot of turns if you're just sitting and shooting with sufficient marker light support. Finally, you have Zephyrs Grace, and this is something that is basically the panic button when you need to get somewhere fast. A lot of times, that few inches that you can gain from re-rolling your advance roll is going to be really beneficial. And especially if it's paired with Vior La Sept infantry, suddenly you're pretty darn mobile and packing a punch while you're doing that. So this is something that is very situational, but when you need it, you'll be happy that it's there. As far as options go, you basically have 3 choices that you have to make when using an Ethereal. One of those is if you're going to stick with an Honor Blade or upgrade to Equalizers, and really, Equalizers are the better weapon. They're a little bit punchier, they're going to make better use of his attacks that he has, but the thing to keep in mind is that your Ethereal isn't a close combat master. He is close combat oriented because he doesn't have a gun, but he's still not going to win any battles for you on the tabletop by going and punching dudes. So we really don't want to be investing points into his close combat ability if we don't have to, and we don't, so we won't. The other option that you have is to take a hover drone, and for the most part, your Ethereal is going to be hanging out on your gun line, buffing units around him, and not necessarily need to be super mobile. The one exception to that is if your Ethereal is there strictly as a drone buffer unit. And in that case, if you have mobile drones, as opposed to drones that just hang out with your broadsides or your Riptide benefiting from Kaoyun, if you have a mobile drone unit and you need an Ethereal to keep up with it, then a hover drone isn't a bad choice because it allows that Ethereal to keep up with those drones if they're running around the tabletop. Is that necessarily the least risky option? No. Is it something that I do regularly in my games? No. But if you are employing a strategy that utilizes a lot of drones moving around the tabletop, the Ethereal needs to have a drone in order to keep up with them, plain and simple. Otherwise, don't bother. The final option that you have is to take a signature system, and well, a signature system on an Ethereal is a good risk mitigation strategy, a good denial opportunity for your opponent. It's generally not very valuable to have a signature system on an Ethereal because other units that you could put it on, like a Cadre Fireblade, like a Commander, like a Firesight Marksman, are probably going to get more benefit out of it. So yes, while you could potentially put your signature systems on an Ethereal if they are compatible with infantry, it's generally not worth it because other units are going to be able to use it better, and that's really the point of having them, is to use them. So overall, I would stay away from putting signature systems on Ethereals because you'll get more use out of them elsewhere. Finally, we get to probably the most important point about Ethereals, and that is Sept Choice. Now, none of the Ethereal abilities are Sept locked. Regardless of the detachment and the Sept associated with that detachment that you take your Ethereal in, it will affect your whole army, and that is fantastic. That means you have a lot of flexibility where you put your Ethereal, and it also means that you can kind of play the system a little bit and get the best bang for your buck out of your Ethereal, regardless of the rest of your army composition. In particular, I think the best way to run an Ethereal is as Sakia's Sept because of the +1 to leadership. That makes his leadership 10, and if you recall, he shares his leadership with everyone hanging out with him, and that's a pretty big improvement. Now we're getting at least 2 leadership out of every unit, and up to 4 in some cases. So that's a huge benefit when we talk about having large size units that are susceptible to morale. That alone makes Sakia a fantastic choice for Ethereals, but is particularly useful when we think about taking it in a particular type of Vanguard detachment. That detachment is Sakia's Sept with an Ethereal and 3 Firesight Marksmen. Does it have to be Marksman? No, but it actually works out really darn well if it is. So you get a couple things going in that combo. One is, of course, you get the increased leadership of the Ethereal that can apply to any unit nearby. 2, because your marksmen only have a single shot weapon, which is the marker light, you are able to reroll all of their misses, which is fantastic. They have a ballistic skill of 3 up, and in comparison to something like Cadre Fireblade, yeah, that's less reliable. But once they become Sakia's Sept, suddenly that's pretty darn good. Hitting on 3s, rerolling misses is pretty valuable for a marker light source, especially at that price point. So we have a really good Ethereal, we have some really reliable Firesight Marksmen. It's a good detachment overall. A super huge added benefit of that, though, is that this Ethereal facilitates the larger units that we really want to see when it comes to drones. one of the things about drones is that they only have leadership 6. And that means that people are really restricted in the size of their units because of the risk of losing them to morale. For a unit that's going to die, just as a function of its purpose, having low morale really is a detriment. By taking a Sakia Ethereal, we totally get around that. And so you can take much larger drone units now with a Sakia Ethereal, plus you have all the benefits of the marksman. So overall, it's a fantastic detachment. Really, the way to go with Ethereal, if you're going to bring one, is for it to be Sakia Sept, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You still get a lot of the same benefits, just not quite to the degree you do with a Sakia detachment. So overall, I'm a fan of Ethereals. I think they facilitate certain army compositions very well, namely things with lots of infantry and lots of drones. But otherwise, if you're dealing with lower numbers of infantry, lower number of drones, you don't need an Ethereal in the same way that you need Counterfire Blades and Commanders. And so that's why you see Counterfire Blades and Commanders a little bit more frequently than you see Ethereals, just because they are that much more essential for the function of the army, whereas Ethereals are a little bit more situational. So overall, a good unit that often gets outshined by some other choices. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you take Ethereals commonly or uncommonly? Either way, love to hear about it in the comments. And of course, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This channel is made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there and the associated Discord channel. Special thanks to Aaron Fox, Shifty, Jim Bob, Scott Heater, Nick Steele, Jared Egler, Tao Oswell, Zach Brooks, Stephen Cohen, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Zealous Brimstone, Evan Wells, Benjamin, Julian Peck, Giovanni DiMaggio, and Chris Kessler.